So I'm going to start off. There was a New York Times uh, article that came out this morning. I didn't notice it. I believe it came out at like 6 a.m. this morning. So it's about a man in Brooklyn at the Mount Sinai Hospital after abdominal surgery. It was discovered that he had a fungus called Candida auris. Um, The good thing about this is that it is only going after people like most candidiasis infections with those with weakened immune systems. So those that are old, those that are sick, those that have come out of probably surgery like this man, and he was elderly. So it's probably a combo of both. But this is a big problem for people who are immune compromised and for those, such as ha- those that have HIV and or AIDS. So, in this, it was found that it was in a neonatal unit. The uh, man that was in Brooklyn at Mount Sinai, he died after being in 90 days in the hospital. One of the reasons that it is so bad is that it went into the whole entire hospital room. So this is an issue where the infection is not just in the person, but in their room. So if we don't catch a patient with this infection and then we put in a new patient, or we have somebody else moving moving the beds, or we don't sterilize the equipment well enough, like mattresses are very hard, anything soft is very hard. So this is the quote from the article. Everything was positive: the walls, the bed, the doors, the curtains, the phones, the sink, the whiteboard, the poles, the pump, the mattress, the bed rails, the canister hole, window shade, ceiling, everything in the room was positive. So they went through this room. They took everything out that was positive. This is why your hospital bills are so expensive. Um, they had to test everything. And so they believe that this has been uh, because of overuse of azoles in the rise of resistant funguses. So Matthew Fisher, they have a link to an article of his and about the resistance. And so he's the first one on here. There's also other people that helped write this, but this just came out recently. So it's a decent abstract, but it's about how these resistances happen. Uh, the problem is that right now we are using all of the antifungals for everything in crops and in uh, timber. And the reason for that is that there's only about 100 funguses that attack human beings. Most of the other fungi, uh, fungi are really old. And the reason, let me find it. Which one was it? It's this one. So fungi are really old. They evolved quite early. However, they're very similar to us in cell structure. So yeasts are very similar to human cell structure and animals in general. So it makes it very hard to target them. There is a distinct uh, way to go about this, but right now we are kind of very limited. And then the other problem with all of our antifungals, as far as I remember, is that fluconazole and a lot of these cause hepatic injury, which means liver. They're just very, very tough for your liver to process, and that's where all your cytochrome P450s, all of your, you know, 3A4, 2D6, all that stuff. Once your liver goes, you can't quite process any other drugs. So you have a very severe immunocompromised patient, and they get a very tough fungal, they get toxicity. And then the other thing is, it's, babies are not the greatest. So um, it seems like it goes through, yeah, CYP3A4, which is your biggest. So for those who are not in pharmacy, CYP3A4 is your biggest drug metabolizer. And the drugs that we do use, the azoles, um, cause prolongation of the QT interval. So the QT is on your electrocardiogram. So what ends up happening is, let me see if I can find a nice one. So your QT prolongation, when the QT interval is pulled apart and delayed, the atrium can get desynchronous and cause atrial fibrillation. So that is the other problem with these drugs, is that now we have resistance. So if you have resistance, you need to either give a lot of that drug to, or a lot in that same class. I'm guessing as a strategy, because this is generally what happens when we have bacteria that are resistant. And when you give a lot of a drug that causes these severe side effects, we might be seeing these patients that are already kind of very vulnerable to problems having more issues. Now, the reason is that not only is it resistance, it's been resistant since forever. So as far as I can tell, Candida auris, its DNA was tracked, and they found that it has been here for over 1,000 years, because funguses are very old. They evolved a long time ago. However, we have been using these antifungals in the environment for such a long time, um, that all of the more susceptible uh, more susceptible fungi have now gotten killed, and those ones may have kept this one in check. So the first case of this fungal infection was in Japan, and then we found one that has tracked back to South Korea, but it's been brought over to the United States. And the issue with the United States is that there's this nice, lovely map, um, and we're seeing a lot of it in Illinois and New York and New Jersey. So, New York and New Jersey, it might be just a consequence of the possibly a hospital has been infected, and there's so many people that are just on top of each other that that kind of happens in the hospital as well. But in Illinois, it may be that it is an agricultural, for most of the states out here are agricultural. So this is kind of a concern that in the Midwest, that maybe there's more of this and we just don't know, because they're very agricultural centers, and this may have come up from agriculture just because we use a lot of antifungals there. But we don't know what caused this. We don't know where the source is from, and we don't know exactly all the stuff with it. But these are the cases so far. There have been almost 600 in the United States, with another 30 that are probable. So it's closer to like 620. But this is but they haven't identified where exactly who these patients are. They're keeping everything very hush because they don't. It's not something that the normal person needs to worry about. However, if this is in hospitals, and you get, a really severe cold, not only can you get MRSA, which is methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, you can now get this. So that is really the biggest breakdown for how this happened and why it's now a clinically significant problem, but it is resistant to a lot of stuff. And so at first, so one of the things that I ended up looking up was where it was. Um, why is it called Candida auris when it's causing blood infections on immunocompromised patients? And it was because the first incidence was that it was found in the ear canal on a Japanese woman. So, and I'm gonna pull this from. So it is drug resistant to fluconazole, which is this drug here. This is what it looks like. It's part of the azole class. Um, so I pulled this up. I'm pulling this from my medicinal chemistry book. So if you want a decent medicinal chemistry like handbook, this is not a bad one to pick up. But fluconazole, uh, so, all right, let's go back a bit. So from this, my medicinal chemistry book, drug design for fungal infections is more challenging than for bacterial infections. Fungi are more sophisticated, and their cellular structure starts to more closely approximate mammalian cellular structure, leading to design challenges in developing agents that are toxic to fungi but non-toxic to humans. One vulnerable feature of fungal biochemistry is the structure of the membrane. There is a fundamental difference in the lipid composition between fungal and mammalian cells. Ergosterol is the predominant membrane sterol lipid in fungi, and cholesterol is the principal sterol in human cells. This is a biochemical difference that can be exploited for drug design. Another significant difference is that fungi, like bacteria, have cell walls, and mammalian cells do not. Accordingly, possible druggable targets for antifungal includes the fungal membrane disruptors, which they literally poke holes in the fungus. Ergosterol biosynthesis inhibitors. There are three different ones: 14 alpha demethylase and enzyme inhibition, squalene epoxidase enzyme inhibition, and delta 14 reductase enzyme inhibition. And then the fifth version is the fungal cell wall disruptors. Um, so all of these involve membrane biochemistry. So the Candida auris must have, I'm just guessing, must have either a different synthesis pattern, or it has a different enzyme, or it has a way to expel. So back down to skipping the other ones. The azole antifungal agents act by membrane destabilization by inhibiting the biosynthesis via the 14 alpha demethylase enzyme inhibition. So I looked this up. So here is a paper from New Zealand, and I didn't read the paper exactly completely. I did like a nice quick, but here you see fluconazole, here's voriconazole, intraconazole, and lansterol. So lanosterol, sorry. So all of these have these nitrogenous groups. And the reason I have this up here is because their design modeling is very, very nice, where you can see this heme group is getting bound by that nitrogenous group. And that's how this ends up working. So either there's something going on with auris that's causing this drug resistance. So either we're going to need a new different drug design on the pharmacophore, which is the active part of the drug, or we're going to have to find something that inhibits what's inhibiting this. So that is, but the thing is, the azoles, they seem to accumulate, according to this book, that they accumulate within the fungus and stay around for about 120 hours. So even when they're sublethal, they usually are very good, but for some reason, in this case, they just aren't making it to the target. So I would suggest that you look up what the CDC has on this. Pretty useful stuff. Um, the tracking map is pretty nice. Um, oh, yeah. So this is what I wanted to show. So this is the um, lipid structured membrane, ergosterol. This is the one that is in fungus, and this is the one in cholesterol. I hope I didn't just misspeak there. But so as you look between the two of them, they're very, very similar, and that's one of the problems. So the main thing that we want to that's the main thing I'm trying to see is really just yeah, it just looks like there's a double bond here that is not in cholesterol. So there's a double bond there. And then, of course, the tail is completely different. So, I mean, this is the only real difference between us. And that's why it makes it so hard and difficult to, you know, to do this. It's just one of those. And let me see what else. Oh, I was looking up what Candida albicans and kind of whether that can help us know anything about this. Oh, so the other thing I wanted to talk about real quickly, I'm sorry, I'm going on a little bit too long, is that we discovered the azole group in the 1940s. So, and it's really been pretty pretty much used since the 80s. So this has come up in about 40 years. We've completely probably obliterated our ability to use and target fungi. So it's kind of amazing that we kind of messed this up quite quickly. Uh, and that's all I have to say is that this is this is not something that most normal people have to deal with. However, if you are a medical professional, you just have to take normal precautions. However, it's really resistant. It gets into the ceiling, it gets into everything. And they tried in the story in the New York Times, they had tried running a hydrogen peroxide mist to clean the whole room. They thought it would scrub the air, and they found that it didn't work with this fungus. So once it's basically in your hospital, you have to expect that it's probably going to stay there. That that you have to take almost the most severe precautions in order to get rid of it. But once it's there, it's there. It's carried on everything that it can get itself on. Here's the map from the New York Times about what's been going on with that. And it seems like there's a couple in each country so far. Um, but yeah, it's not really, it's something that we're going to have to learn how to deal with, but it's not anything that we know much about yet. Not to sound like a broken record, but the issue is that we have to help patients. So really, it's not so much that we have to be uh, careful about us ourselves getting it, but us spreading it to other patients. So, doing a very probably invasive scrub change, probably doing, having probably them isolated, having their own staff with them is, and that staff basically not working with any other patients that don't have this. That's pretty much it. Um, and so it's going to be very costly to go about this, and it's going to be very unusual, but it seems like that might be the way to do that. Just taking severe precautions. But yeah, it seems to be that the reason it's also found in areas where there is drug resistant aspergillus. So that's the other reason um why they think it came from agriculture. But yeah, the last story is very interesting because it's about um this was in New York City, and that's partially why New York has so many cases. Is it seems like it got into some hospital in New York. However, just probably boosting people's immune system to fight it, and knowing that the azoles probably won't work on it. That's pretty much the. Oh, and the other reason that this is hard to deal with is that we can't really identify it. It looks like everything else. So that's it's not one of those that we are used to seeing. Maybe as we get more information out, maybe we'll be able to see it a little bit better. But right now, we've basically, you have 300 million people in the United States and you have 600 cases. So you have one out of half a million people that show up. All right, a hospital. I'm trying to think. There's like 6 hospitals and there's 30,000 people in the city I'm living in. So maybe 50,000 that should serve. So we would see 1/10 of a patient out of all 6 of those hospitals if we were to take that data and extrapolate it out. Like we would not, and that's in a whole year. So it would take 10 years for us to see one patient with this. So it's not common yet, but it's just there's a reason nobody knows what this is. We see diabetes in like half of our patients. We don't, and heart attacks, we don't see this. So that's the other thing that we have to see about is looking out for this is just it's kind of bad. Well, kind of bad. It is bad. It's killing people, but I'm It's not the the Last of Us, zombie fungus, but it's it's up there. It because the other reason that this is bad is that if it translates those genetics to another fungus and that's a more common fungus, then that one can reproduce and then it can transfer. But this evolved its abilities 1,000 years ago. I would think that it would be there's got to be something that was killing it. So there's got to be something that we overlooked, and either we wiped out a whole species that it was keeping it in check, or and we're SOL, and we're a bunch of POSs, but you know, and SOBs. But um, hey, that's so far what this is. So I'd suggest reading this article. I would suggest taking a quick look at Matthew Fisher's stuff. Take a look at the CDC and see just their stuff and what their infection fact sheets, um, and then uh, that's pretty much what you need right now. However, it's just a bit of a quick look. It's not. It's bad, but it's one of those where I think this is going to be another bug that we're going to have to get used to. Kind of like we're getting used to MRSA, um, and this is another one. So it was pretty much used in the 80s, and we've messed this up in 40 years. Man, that is mind-boggling. Some Man. All right. Well, it's 2:30 in the morning. I'm gonna go to sleep.